So I'm a very big person. I have my goals. Like I want to become a head coach one day. I want to win a conference tournament or conference tournament through my own battles as a young adult, going through that, figuring out my place in this world and all of that. So a lot of what you're talking about is finding your purpose, finding your reason, what motivates me to keep going. And I help a student athlete. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not going to be the one to talk them through crisis or be able to give them the mental health supports that a professional will. But I want them to know there's somebody there advocating for them. And
Hello and welcome to the Reflective Coach podcast with me, Coach Luca. I hope you've been enjoying the recent episode and the content that's been shared with you, and especially in last week's episode with Jake Nannon, the basketball coach. Jake spoke so much about player development and gave so many different insights that the extended shorts clips that I've shared with you are really useful tools and reflection points for you to really take away, and giving yourself an opportunity to listen to the full episode on Spotify and YouTube. It was a great episode and I really enjoyed it, and I listened to it back many times this week, and I've taken so much more away every time that I've listened to it. And that is something that I recommend that you do. Listen to it once, listen to it a second time, and then listen to it a third time. Each time you listen to it, I'm sure there's points that you can add to your notes, to your journal, and there's different perspectives and thoughts that you can have with it, and different ways that you can think about the podcast and how you take in the content and the information on that feedback and how it portrays and comes across in the different scopes and times that you listen to it. However, as I continue to share with you more content, more information, more feedback, more insights, this week I'm delighted to welcome Coach Morgan Philliber. It was great to have Morgan on the podcast because she has so many great insights, but has such a wonderful future ahead in terms of her own development and what she's already developed in terms of her own approach within the game and how that's going to look long term. It's great because Morgan has said she'll come back on the podcast in the future, so it gives us real reflection points onto where we are now having this discussion as to where it'll be in the future and how much she's progressed as a coach and as a person, and having that real reflective point, which is very interesting. Me and Morgan spoke about relationships and bonds, how you figure out what you're doing as a coach. So being a young coach, where you're going, how you're doing it, figuring out what works for you, having that adaptability piece, knowing what methods are going to be useful to you to utilize, but having that slippage essentially so you can make the choices on how you use those methods, those different approaches with players or to the game, tactical side, etc. That really helps finesse and develop your philosophy, your approach to the game, your player management, your hands-on, and how everything else in terms of that really looks. We talked about relating to players and building those relationships and those bonds as a result of understanding them, and ways to really relate to them in ways that it relates to their goals. So moving from a developed strategy and having this mindset of whether it's actually figured out or actually whether it needs to be coached into a player, or creating a pathway where they can really figure out what they want to do, and being supported in the coaching world and that coaching journey on and off the pitch. We talked about finding joy in life, which is a really important point and perspective, and certainly one to listen out for, and has such an interesting concept in terms of that. We talked about finding the best version of you, finding purpose, mental health, mistakes and skills, equipping young people to deal with conflict. We spoke about the rule of three, so that is an interesting point around the 33-minute mark, and what you really take away from that, and how you can establish your own rule of three, or take away this as one that you could really build into your coaching. But really listen out for that as well. We talked about star models, taking role models, demoing their aspirations to players, and really creating a pathway so these players can understand what's in front of them and how other individuals have achieved this and what they've done to develop. We spoke about curiosity and asking questions. We spoke about jumping in, aspirations and goals, the reality in terms of life points and what happens, timelines and uniqueness. So again, figuring out where you're going, what you're doing and how you're doing it, and whether you put a timestamp on there and where you really go from there. We spoke about selfishness as well, and there is such a wonderful insight in terms of Morgan and how she approaches the game, as well as the great future that she has ahead for her. So I hope you really take away the content, continue to add to your journal. You can find the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, LinkedIn, Twitter and Flickr, as well as TikTok. It'd be really helpful if you could drop a like, drop a follow, drop a subscribe, especially across Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. It's at TRC Podcast _ on Twitter. I am Anthony _ Luca, as you can see on screen. It is the Reflective Coach Podcast everywhere else. Drop a like, drop a follow, drop a subscribe, leave a comment. It does really help the podcast, and I really want to help this continue to grow and share these wonderful insights and individuals with you, especially as they have so much to share on the podcast, which makes me really excited every time I'm able to release more content with yourselves. But don't forget to help out the podcast, and I hope you're enjoying it and adding to your journal. I hope to see you soon, and I hope that you're enjoying the podcast for what it is. Many thanks from me. I'm Anthony _ Luca 96, Coach Luca on the Reflective Coach Podcast.
Yeah, and I mean, a big thing we're doing is trying to create the space for mistakes. But if mistakes happen, can we have an interdependent squad where they have the skills to be like, all right, I didn't do it right this time, but how do I, in my own processing, figure out how to fix it and do it better the next rep in the drill? And that's a big thing we're looking for in our team is, all right, we're going to show you, or we're going to explain it, we're going to demonstrate it, and then we're going to let you go try it and figure it out. To work with, they write all the practice plans, they tell you exactly what to do, so it's a very stress-free environment, and I work with a great staff there. So at first it was, but at the end it's really not that bad.
That's good then, and as you settle, then you get more into the swing of things, becomes more normality, and that's a great opportunity then. So obviously you do a lot of day-to-day coaching, and that combination of working with young people, and you have a multiple magnitude of sessions that you deliver with them, on and off the field, classroom, on the field, training and game, and then camps, and then everything else which crops up, whether that be mentoring, whether that be support for the players and so on. So which one would you say, you've got a favored outlook towards, would you say?
Right now, I mean, I'm a super young coach at the collegiate level. I'm only 24 years old. I think right now it's my relationship that I have with my players and the bond that we get to create, because my head coach, he's in his 30s, they just aren't on the same path of life right now. And I'm much more similar in my path of life. I just graduated, I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing. A lot of them are getting to that, especially we've got some fifth years that are oh my gosh, I graduate in December, what's next? And it's having that relationship and being there for them in that kind of way is super rewarding. And I think that's my favorite part right now as a coach.
And I love that, and I think that's great as well. And there's a combination of a few things within that, because I'm still 26, and I as much as I'm pushing away from the ages of 20, 23, 22, and so on, I still feel there might be a 10-year difference between, say, a 16-year-old that I might work with and me, and then that obviously then increases the more kids that I work with that start to go down in terms of high school. But I still feel that I have some relatability to them because I have a lot of interests, and it's easier then to relate because we sort of share, the use of platforms. I might drop on TikTok and I might see some great things. Oh, sir, do you see that on TikTok and this? And automatically I can connect with it. Whereas some of the older staff, not to criticize them in any way whatsoever, they're like, oh, I don't use TikTok, social media is for me. So they're not really getting that relatability. So then some teachers and coaches might bring, a TikTok video into, a classroom debate, or they might start to use it in the PowerPoint, and then it becomes a really good learning tool to connect with, young players. And obviously being at the level you're at, you're in that age range and that, ability to connect with them. So it's a lot more easier when we're in that, position to relate to the individuals that we work with and understand what's going on in and around them and, the world.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Neil, the head coach I work for, he calls himself a dinosaur and it cracks me up, but he tries really hard. there's the TikTok trend where you like run up and it's like, do your best impression of this. And like, he's like, can we do that of me? Because he's a British guy as well. So he's got an accent compared to all these American Midwest kids. And they make fun of him left and right. And he loves it, like just taunting like the way he says certain things and like talks. So it's exciting that like, even if he's disconnected in a way, he's like, all right, you guys enjoy these things. Like, let's incorporate them. Let's have fun with them. Sending the TikToks, like for instance, there was a TikTok. Oh gosh, I wish I could remember who created it, but it was like to an audio, and it was like when the players get too close to you, and it's like, hey, you want to hang out sometime? And I like sent it to a couple of my players, and I'm like, yeah, there's a boundary. Remember, there's this boundary, and it's really fun being able to relate with them and use TikTok as a way to be like, hey, these are funny things that I get too.
And it's good because, some people might turn off and be like, right, we're not incorporating that, we're not using that, or they might see it as a defense mechanism as such because they might see it as a threat. But it is good that you've created those boundaries because, it's, all, safeguards and responsibilities that we have, etc. That's just, part and parcel of the game. But it's great that you've incorporated it and using it because they might see something and then they're like, oh, could we do this? And automatically then it really helps because, the game in America is huge, and obviously the social media side to allow players to project themselves onto a platform is great. So once you get to see, a player at a certain institution or a club, etc., then automatically you might see them, oh, I've seen this on TikTok, and then you can look into their personality and things. So in terms of that data collection, that recruitment, there is also that side which comes into play, that comes into that side of it. So it's a great opportunity then to learn, mentor players and teach them and so on, because they might put something out on TikTok and then a recruiter might see it or might come across it, etc., or might go into that depth, and suddenly they're in a position where like, oh, we don't like the look of this player, we're not going to touch them, and it doesn't always give off the best impression, but that might not be the player deep down. So there are those considerations when it comes to players, and it's a great position that you're sort of in to be that mentor, leader, coach, support mechanism, youth worker, teacher, guider, and everything else which comes under the banner of coach.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at when we add social media and recruiting, when it's with my players, it's definitely like the wild, wild west where it's like, whoa. When it comes to recruiting, it's been a great tool. So obviously I have my coach Twitter account where I connect with a lot of recruits and I can see what they're up to. But it's also like a dangerous tool. Sometimes I see too much of their life and I'm like, all right, I don't need to see everything that you're doing. So it's great because I can connect with them. But at the same time, I'm like, nope, I'm good. I don't need to see everything that you're doing. Especially like, now with phone numbers being linked to all these social media accounts, like I don't need to see everything, but it's definitely not their own fault. It's the way that social media is created and it's built. But at the end of the day, it's doing good. So I'm not going to complain about it.
Absolutely. And whilst you're young at 24 and you've qualified and you're in this position and you have this great opportunity to progress, onwards towards 30 and so on, and you get to have this experience now at a very young age whereby it's going to hold you in good stead, because you might get 5 years in and be like, do you know what, this isn't for me anymore, or I want to move away, or I might end up going into a different career path. But for you, and do you find at times, right, I'm in a position where I know where I'm going, I know what I want to do, I could see myself doing this for 10, 15, 20 years, or is it more of, right, I could see this progressing for 5 years and maybe I might step away? Or are you asking questions around yourself around, is this exactly what I should be doing and this is my purpose?
I mean, so when I was in college, I started as like a marketing major. I was like, yeah, I'm going to go get like a 9 to 5, just do like a stereotypical job. And then I got to like my junior year and I was like, yeah, no, don't want to work 9 to 5. So I like went down the athletic training route for a while and I was like, still don't feel like that passion, that love for what I want to do. And then, so I had a great head coach at the time when I was playing at the collegiate level. And she was like, have you ever thought about coaching once you're done? And I was like, yeah, a little bit. I was like, probably just like youth soccer and stuff like that. She's like, I think you should consider college coaching. And I was like, all right, I'll think about it. So I like kind of prepared myself. I was working with the local high school as a volunteer, kind of getting ready to like, once I graduated, like figure out what I could do. I got a really great opportunity because of my head coach to go be a full-time assistant right away after graduating. So I took that opportunity at a different institution, stayed there for about a year, and now I'm at where I'm at now. But going through the path that I've gone through, I know this is something I want to do long term. I have goals for myself where it's like 10, 15 years down the road, this is what I want to do. Will I stay as a coach forever? Maybe not. I've thought about like, all right, there's probably at some point I'm going to want to slow down a little bit, maybe become an athletic director, work in compliance. But being in athletics is where I find joy in my life, even personally and professionally. So coaching will be a part of my life for a while, but then I possibly will transition once I need to slow down a little bit.
And I love that. And there's a lot of takeaways in that. And if we unpack that, there's a lot within it, because sometimes, we might end up in a sector, as you say, marketing, and we're like, right, I don't want to do this. It doesn't fit for me. And you can find a really good route out of it. And sometimes you can't find that good route. You're like, I'm stuck here. I don't know how to get out. And you don't know where the exit doors are, or you don't know how to progress into another, say, room to get where you want to be. And then therefore onto the the new platforms, etc. But it is good where you've had that opportunity to progress and move out of that and go, do you know what, this isn't actually for me. And that can be quite tough at a young age to sort of make that decision, because realistically we're very young until we're 26, 27, because we might have qualified from uni, say at 23, 24 maybe, and then you might have a couple of years in a job. You're still very young in terms of that sense. So when it comes down to it, making that decision, go, no, this isn't for me, and then maybe changing a career path can be a quite eye-opening thing. And really then we start to question, is this the right route for us? But in that sense, it sounds like you have made the absolute right choice, and you're already looking at 10 to 15 years. And if you're looking at 10 to 15 years, that could take you towards your 40s, and obviously life will play in towards that as well. But if you're set towards 40s, then you're in a real good position at that age, whether you want to still progress or to go up those other levels, or to move away completely from coaching for it. But you've got that amazing magnitude of experience behind you. So whilst you've moved away from marketing, and you're finding joy in your life, which is great, and that's the key importance, is finding joy, because as they say, if you find a job which you'll love, you'll never work a day in your life, and that is so key. But whilst you're doing that, and you say you've got goals long term, have you developed a full-on strategy how you're going to achieve those goals, or is it more of you've got a vision and then you'll develop that strategy as you progress?
So I'm a very big person. I have my goals. Like I want to become a head coach one day. I want to win a conference tournament, or conference tournament, to go to the national tournament, all those things. But I'm a very take life one day at a time, because I always have set plans and they never work out the way they should. And that's a big thing why coaching, I think, works so well for me, is that I'm always on my toes. I'm ready to adapt for everything. And so I don't know how I'm going to get there, and I don't know exactly what that path is going to look like. Like, who knows what institution I'll get my first head coaching break at. So it's very just like take it one day at a time, do whatever I think my heart tells me is what's going to get me there. But I don't have like a set plan of like, this is how I've got to do it.
And I love that, taking that one day at a time, because, we might have that opportunity where we might over-strategize, and we might overthink, and we're compensating for a lot of what we might say for areas that we fall short on, because we're like, all right, I haven't done this, I haven't achieved that, I wanted to do this by this age, and therefore you might over-strategize, right, I've got to start volunteering more, or I've got to get a second job, and suddenly you're filling your life up, and you're spinning more plates, and before you know it, you are 26, 27, 28, and you're looking back like, oh, I didn't go on holiday there, I didn't do that, I didn't enjoy this, I don't see my friends. And sometimes we have to make those sacrifices in life, and we make it in the working world, and especially coaching, because we're coaching on weekends and later nights and traveling, etc. But it is hard, because then we're sort of looking back going, oh, do you know what, I actually wish I could turn back time and enjoy maybe just that one holiday or that one night out. And it is hard because we're trying to pursue that, but if we don't live it one day at a time, all those days are suddenly a go, and then we won't have one more day to maybe live at a time. And that's the harsh reality of life. And not to put a dampener on it, but that's always a key, something that I've learned, and a key consideration of mine is not to overthink or not to overstimulate, to push myself to say 30 and 35. I want to enjoy being 26, and I'm starting to panic now at 26, and that's because I'm like, oh, I was only 22, and then boom, 26 has hit me, and I'm like, right, what have I really achieved over the last 4 years, and am I happy with that? And therefore I've gone, right, maybe career-wise, yes, but life-wise, maybe no. So it's like, right, at 26, I want to get that tick in the life box and enjoy life a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, so coaching's like my full-time passion. Like I do it as a job, but I also do some like side work as a mental health advocate, and that's something I'm super proud of and I will always forever do. I went through my own battles as a young adult, going through that, figuring out my place in this world and all of that. So a lot of what you're talking about is like finding your purpose, finding your reason, like what motivates me to keep going. And that's a lot of the work I do on the other hand of outside of coaching is working with athletes and former athletes. And it's like, all right, we've all had these struggles. Like, how do we make the best out of them? How do we show others that it's okay that every day is not your 100% best, but it's a part of your journey, and that at the end of the day, if you can look back and you're like, hey, I'm proud of the things I did when I was 23 because it got me to where I wanted to be, that's all that matters. And it's exciting because my work in mental health and with the organization I work with goes hand in hand because we focus on student athletes and their mental health. So it's super exciting. Like people don't realize always that they're like in that space, but we're always all in that space.
Of course, and that sounds great in terms of what you're doing, and especially in being in within those spaces, because that's really important to try and figure out where we're at, where we're going, why we're doing it, that purpose, and making sure the joy is behind it as well. And whilst you say you take a day a day at a time and see what happens, and you might have that goal of what you might want to do in 10 to 15 years, and you have that vision. So, say in a year's time, a full time mental health job came up, and you could end up getting in that and doing a lot more in terms of that, but it took you away from coaching. Is that something you would consider, or is it like, all right, it doesn't fit in terms of my goal, so I might not get there at this point?
So I don't think I'd ever leave coaching for it because a lot of what I do in the mental health space is for athletics. And I always want it to be like, can I help a student athlete? I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not going to be the one to like talk them through crisis or be able to like refer, like give them the mental health supports that a professional will. But I want them to know there's somebody there advocating for them and supporting them. I have a list of resources in my office. Student athletes can always see it when they come down and talk to me of like, hey, here's these resources. So if you ever need them, here's the place you can come and find them. And it's like a no questions asked, like, hey, I need to go talk to somebody. Where do I go? It's something where it's like, I'm not going to judge you. There's no stigma. There's no negative repercussion in you going and getting the help that you needed. Looking back at my career, that it was terrifying when I had to go get help. How are my coaches going to look at me? How is the school going to look at even my teammates? Are they going to think I'm like not capable of doing what I need to be able to do on the field? And through time and working through this stigma that's still very present in athletics, like I got into a place where my coaches was like, go do what you need to do, because when you take care of yourself, we get the best version of you. And I want that for the athletes that I work for. All right, you've got to take an hour, 2 hours a week to go talk to somebody. Please go do that because I want the best version of you. A big thing that I look for is like, can you give 100% of what you have that day? So say it's been a bad day and all you have is your 50% of your capacity. All right, give me all 50%. And I'm not going to like berate you for not having everything in you that day. Like it happens. We're humans. Emotions happen. The athletes I work with are student athletes. They have school, they've got family, personal life, that I can't just expect them to just be an athlete.
And I love that. And I think that's such a key consideration for anyone listening, because sometimes we have this high expectation, right, boom, intensity's got to start the moment you walk on a pitch. We've got to achieve this, we've got to achieve X, Y, and Z. We're going to push for the objectives, we're going to play the players through these different scenarios, we're going to transition them, and we're going to have high expectations for, a solid 8 out of 10 performance. But realistically, as you say, there's so many things that we can't control, and a lot of coaches that I've spoken to on here, and it must be a big American thing, is controlling the controllables, because that is a consistent message that I'm getting. And I was thinking about that the other day, and I was like, right, there's only so many controllables I can actually control. I can't control X, Y, and Z, because if this player's come in and they've had a bad day, I can control the fact that they might regulate their emotions in a certain way, but I can't control the day that they've just had and how that might go into their mental thinking. I can't control their mental processes. So therefore, there's only so much that I can control. So when it comes down to it, I can't expect my players to be at their tip-top best, following a day of school, following a day of learning, because that's quite a lot which they've gone through. And it's, they might have been up 7 o'clock in the morning. They've then had a magnitude of lessons. They've had a lot of learning to take away. They've had reflections. They've had interactions with their peers. Then they've gone home, had tea, etc. Then they've come out. Then they've got to prepare for coaching. Then take all that on board. And that's a long day and a lot to expect from them. So I think it's good that you mentioned between, mental health, that player, the person-wise, to expect, they might only have 50%. So give that 50%. And, we can deal with the other 50%. We can work on it. And that's a great thing. And you're in a fantastic position where you are a mental health advocate and you're able to support those athletes and so on. But whilst it comes down to it, some coaches and managers may be like, right, this is my team, my squad, my players, etc. They might have mental health issues, but it's down to me to, control them or manage them or support them, nurture and so on. So I don't want to pass them on or, have that partnership working or refer them, etc. And some coaches have that controlling factor. But for those coaches who are realistic, by referring and supporting those players, you're not actually failing yourself. You're not failing the players, because the whole point is to work with these professionals so they can try and give, the knowledge and support which we don't have in maybe those areas to really support them.
Yeah, 99.99% of coaches are not mental health professionals. They don't have the degrees in it. They don't have the clinical experience. So it's not a downfall of the coach. Like you said, it is a positive if this is outside of my scope of what I know. I'm going to bring in the resource for my athlete to give them that. And that was something that was super hard to learn. I saw it as an athlete when my coaches were like, hey, here's the resources, here's all this, that it wasn't her relinquishing control from our program and having control over it. It was her actually taking control of hey, I've done what I know is in my scope of practice to provide the support for them. A big thing my institution doing right now is that once a month during the school year, they meet with a sports psychologist where they get to talk through coping mechanisms. It's not one-on-one therapy at all or team therapy. It's an environment. So they did an activity where they had a full cup of water and they had teammates throwing little pieces of paper at them. And it's okay, when you add a bunch of stuff on top of your full cup already, how does that make you feel? And how do we handle that when it does happen? Because regardless of what people try to idealize life to be, you're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to be asked to do too much. It's how do we cope with getting too much, and how do we set boundaries not to have too much added to our plate? So going back to it's not the coach's downfall, and I want to not control every aspect of their life, but I want to make sure they're getting pushed down the right way. And I know it's not going to be perfect, and we're all humans, and it's not they're not going to be perfect. I don't want them to think they have to be perfect, but I want them to know they have the opportunity to make mistakes, but have their space to go get the support they need.
I really love that, and that's something which I was just, typing up and reflecting on earlier, is how you give those space. And, we might have this expectation, again, of players coming in and they're there to learn, they're there to develop. We want them to, achieve those higher levels. But realistically, whether these players move on as individuals in 5 years, or they're playing for a different club, a different manager, or a different coach, and they might be at a higher level in 5 years compared to where they're at now. But they're at that level because we allowed them to make those mistakes. And even though we're maybe a bit envious that they weren't at that level in 5 years with us now, or for us at that level, but they are for another manager, they wouldn't be at that level unless we allowed them to make those mistakes and really get there. And sometimes it's hard to allow players to make mistakes or even get into that position or create the space because, again, we have these high expectations where players should be or where we want them to be. And sometimes it's just flipping that mentality and going, you know what, it's completely fine that they're making mistakes, and it's not a reflection on my coaching session, it's not a reflection on that. Sometimes it might be because you might have over-anticipated and built too much into it, but by just allowing players to make mistakes and going, right, I can see what they're doing wrong, or we might have to go in and correct this, or they might lack understanding, just allows you to go in and give them those extra strategies or further support to really get down and work with them.
Yeah, and a big thing we're doing is trying to create the space for mistakes, but if mistakes happen, can we have an interdependent squad where they have the skills to be all right, I didn't do it right this time, but how do I, in my own processing, figure out how to fix it and do it better the next rep in the drill? And that's a big thing we're looking for in our team is, all right, we're going to show you or we're going to explain it, we're going to demonstrate it, and then we're going to let you go try it and figure it out. Where it's not like we're forcing you to be perfect every time, but we're allowing you to like see it, work it out, try to fix it yourself. But if it becomes a persistent, okay, you're not doing it right, you keep messing it up. All right, we're going to bring the group back in. We're going to restructure and reteach it and give those pointers and let you go again. And that works within their like personal student life. Say, all right, we let you off the class. Like, we expect you to do well. We get reports back. Oh, you're not doing well. You're not going to class like we explained and demonstrated to you. All right, let's bring the individual in, or the individuals, have that conversation, give them their correcting points, and let them go again. It's letting them, yes, be interdependent and figure it out, but also guiding them along that process.
And that's great, and there's so much within that as well. And just on that point where you said be the best version of you, when it comes down to it then, what is the best version of Coach Morgan then? How do you realise what the best version of you is?
The best version of me is when I can go to the practice session or the team meeting or whatever we're doing, and I don't think about my to-do list. My to-do list is always a mile long. Whether I'm super busy or I'm not, it's always a mile long. But if I can go into the session or whatever it is without thinking about it, I know I'm going in as the best version.
And I love that, and I think that's great. And just as you're talking now, reflecting on two bosses, which I have. So I have my previous boss and I have my current boss. Now, my previous boss is huge on people, would always have a massive to-do list, would always be very busy, had a very big remit. But if you said, right, can I have half hour of your time? Bang, half hour you would have, and anything else would switch off, and that to-do list wouldn't matter. Or even if it sprung up automatically, you didn't have a half hour booked in, she would allocate that space and time to you and give it up. Whereas now my current boss, again, a very good people manager, a very good people person, just sometimes lacks that ability to switch off a half hour or park things, and just is 100 mile an hour because she's already like yep, and boom, boom, boom. And that's just because that's the way she's always worked, the way she's always processed things. But for me, coming from someone who can drop that for a half hour compared to someone who can switch off and has a to-do list, it's very hard to sort of transition between the both. And it's just taken me a little bit of time to adapt and just crack on and get on with it and understand how she operates. But I think just for her to maybe step up in terms of how she then evolves her leadership and management of people, I think it's just how she drops that for half hour. And it's hard because we're not made of half an hours, and there's a lot of half an hour conversations we could have, and that's a lot of time that's taken up. But I think if she just made that space and switched off from that to-do list, and that's a very tough skill to have, and something which you do very well, I think that's the next step which she needs to take. So, by you having that now and realising, right, I can park that, and this is my focus, and this is what I'm here to do at this point, I think it's a top skill to take away, and it positions yourself very well by doing so.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, whatever admin work, whatever, like, paperwork I need to get done or whatever it is, like, it doesn't matter if my student athletes aren't taken care of. Like, we tell our kids all the time here that, like, I would much rather be having the conversation with you, talking about life, talking about school, maybe just talking about our game model and what we're doing, over sending emails and doing all the other things, because you guys matter. You are important to what we're doing. And if you're not taken care of, we're not going to get where we're going. So we always tell them, like, if you need to talk, we're a phone call or text away, or even just walk down to our office. Depends on the kind of time of year. Like, if it's the school year, obviously just walk down to our office. During the summer, though, they know they can shoot us a text or set up a call with us, and we'll always be there for them. We don't always answer right away, and people sometimes forget, like, we do have lives and we are trying to work at the same time, but we always are, like, very trying our best to be there as soon as we can for them.
Absolutely, and that's great that you are, and it's great that you have that opportunity. And when it comes down to it, though, obviously there's a lot of external factors which comes down to the players, and a lot of things that we can't control. And as you said, they've had a lot going on their plate, so we might only get the best 50% of them. But whilst you have this understanding as well as expectation of what you'd like in a session, and the understanding being of how their day may have gone, etc. But what is the best version of players that you'd like to see, regardless, even if they're at 50%?
I think the biggest thing is, like, communication's like the biggest thing. I can't know that you're at only 50% unless you tell me. If you come to practice, you're in a pissy mood, you're just slow, sluggish, not doing, like, just taking, like, slow to your first touch, slow to doing anything that we ask. Like, we're not going to know what's going on. We're just going to be like, what's going on with this player today? Like, they haven't told us anything, or they just not want to be here. And those are just assumptions that come to every coach's mind, whether they like it or not. It's, oh, they just don't want to be here today, or they're mad at us, like whatever. So the biggest thing is the communication. Like, hey, coach, like, I don't have everything that I should have today when it comes to my energy and my presence. Here's what I do have, and I'll do my best to bring all of it. That's what matters. Like, yes, I want their first touch to be amazing. I don't want them to like be in a bad mood or anything like that. But it's the communication, and then the true just like desire to like be their best that day. That's all I can ask of them.
And I think that's key, because sometimes we have young people come in and automatically they have the assumption that we understand what's going on, and we might have the ability to read situations and read their demeanour and maybe pick off signs and understand, right, they're not at that mental capacity, or I'm not going to get the best out of them today, I can already see this, so I might have to adapt it. But realistically, if they're not displaying that and they're very good at masking it, which they can be, you know, by then being sluggish and not on top of their game, and then we're like, right, I'll do this, do that, and we're trying to push them and increase that intensity and support them. You know, if they're still not doing it and still not performing, by them not communicating, they're literally shooting themselves in the foot. And I think that's a key skill for them to develop, is just that communication, just approach, say, look, I've had a bad day, or I'm not feeling this, or and just sometimes, you know, taking that ownership. And it is hard, because it even comes down to ourselves to go and approach maybe our bosses, etc. But I think, you know, as you develop that more as a young person, I think that's such a key takeaway to take on even in the working world beyond coaching.
Yeah, and I mean, a big thing, I've been asked to develop my coaching philosophy a couple times, like interview questions, or just like people asking me, like, why do you do what you do? And there's always the part of like, yes, soccer's there, like, but soccer's not why I coach. Like, I want to equip every athlete, student athlete, every kid that I work with the skills to be ready to go into the real world when they're done. I want them to be able to know how to handle conflict, because there's always conflict in athletics teams, whether we like it or not. I want them to be able to know how to communicate with a superior. So at this point in their life, it's their coach. How do they communicate with us when things are good, when things are bad? And there's so many life skills that come out of sports, and people sometimes forget what sports do for people, that's all I want them to do, whether they go and play overseas after they're done with us, or they just go enter the real world and get a job. I want them to have the skills to be successful no matter what they do. So I've got to be willing to teach them through trial and success of like, this is how you do it and this is how you don't do it.
And I think that's absolutely key there again, around life skills and what we can really develop in the young people or the players that we work with. And there's so much that they can take away. And you touched upon it there, is conflict. And conflict is massive, especially in sport. We've seen it all the time. We might confront it. It might confront us. But it's always there regardless, no matter how well of an environment we create, no matter how pally, friendly, light and relaxed it may be. It always exists because it is sport and that's the way it is. And no matter how many battles we can have with it, it's always going to be there. But when it comes down to conflict then, how do you manage conflict within your team or amongst your players?
Yeah, so the biggest thing, so interdependency is like a big concept within our program right now. Like, can you guys do things on your own? Can you figure it out on your own? So we have this concept, the rule of three. So can you figure it out yourself and correct it yourself? So if you're the one mad or whatever, can you figure it out yourself? Can your teammate help you figure it out? So can they correct the behavior or bring the people and have them settle it out? But then the third thing is the coaching staff comes in and helps settle it. So at that point, it'd be bringing all the parties in, like talking it through, creating an action plan of like, how are we going to like resolve this? I mean, at the end of the day, like some of this conflict that most college teams have is dumb. And they'll admit it like months later, like, oh yeah, that was silly. Like I was just mad at the moment. So a lot of the time it's just validating how they feel and validating that at that moment it upset them. And a lot of the times there's underlying things going on. Like they're not upset at their teammate, they're upset at something else that's going on. And they're using that anger out at their teammate or at the coaching staff or whatever it is. So a lot of the times it's just, can we get them to talk about what's underlyingly going on? I mean, conflict happens. I was on a women's team like most of the time it's dumb, and that I admit that now, like looking back at some of the conflicts I went through. But a lot of it's just like, all right, you're mad, I'm mad, we'll talk it out, and then 10 minutes later, we're fine.
And that's absolutely key because, just talking out and just sitting down and relaxing and then maybe switching off in how those, aggressive feelings may come across, or how we might, have different personalities of players who might approach conflict in different ways, and suddenly it might escalate to 0 to 10 very quickly. So just relaxing it and just bringing it back down and having that conversation can sometimes be the only way you need to. And it's great that you've got an action plan. It's great that you approach things. And again, it comes down to those personality and players and how you approach it and type of conflict, etc. But sometimes players might need an action plan, how they move forward. Some might just benefit from a conversation. So it doesn't always have to be that huge formality. Sometimes it needs to be that. So, it's understanding your people, understanding that personality, and just then how you manage them and what it comes down to when it comes down to it.
Yeah, and one thing we're looking to do as a program, have you ever heard of the DISC analysis?
Yes, I have, yes.
Yeah, so we're looking to do that as a team because there's research and there's studies done that prove that it shows you how to communicate with people better. And we want our teammates to know, or our players to know, how do our teammates receive criticism or receive communication the best. Some people don't like confrontation at all. So like yelling at them in the middle of practice doesn't work. So how do we figure out what teammates can get not yelled at, but have somebody get aggressive with them during practice of like, fix this, do better, make the pass the way you're supposed to. And what kind of teammates, like, do we need to pull aside once the drill's over or when we take a water break of like, hey, we're supposed to do this with our left foot every time. You're not doing it with your left foot. Can you make sure you're doing it right? Or whatever critique it needs to be. Like, how, as a program, do we figure that out? And I'm hoping the DISC assessment helps that. But I think part of it's just going to take time of them being together. There have been some changes in the program recently. So we're looking forward to this year having everyone together and being more consistent, that they just start to like learn that as they're together more.
And I think that's great, and it's hopefully something that's going to benefit long term, and you understand your players, and it's great that you've got those considerations of how to push those players, what players might just need chatting to, how we approach them in different ways, and again, it comes down to that personal analysis, and that's great that you're implementing the DISC analysis, and that's something very similar to what I've done with my team. So we've gone by the colour analysis. So whereby we try to fit colours in a basic for those listening. Colours might represent yellow, green, blue, and red. And blue might be relaxed and chilled. Yellow, you might approach things in different ways. Red, you might be aggressive, and green, you might be a combination. So by understanding this assessment of players and really inheriting it, it allowed us to group players in mentoring groups and then fit them with the right coaches. So there might be players who respond to certain coaches, and again, it comes down to me, not having to have control over everything over my team, or going, I must mentor every one of my players. Right, this coach could actually do that, and they could put this on me, and it worked really well. So it's great when it comes down to it. And it sounds like you've got a fantastic program, and what's going on is really, really working. And when it comes down to it, then, do you have a sort of set player profile of what you'd like players to develop into? So, by the time they leave, they might have that curiosity, they might have that discipline, and they might have respect levels which are really high. Do you have a set player profile which you work upon or would like them to achieve?
Yeah, so what we've created as a program is like star models. So we chose a U.S. player and an English player, having a U.S. and an English coach. That's just how we did it. People that idolize those positions the best, who did what we are looking for those players. So I think it's like anywhere between 8 and 9 points that we get for each players. So like goalkeepers, for instance, that's what I played. So I'm very like familiar with that sheet. And it's like being commanding and demanding of your box. And like, so those are things that we're going to look for in those players that we hope that when they're done with the program, those are things that are just like second nature to them. So those are like idealistic, like how each of these players would leave. But each player that plays on, say it plays number 9, yeah, we have this list of 8 or 9 things where like, yes, we want them to be able to do this. This is how we want them to like mold into, but they all have their unique individual ways of playing, and sometimes a 9 plays more like an 11, and they just like make it work as a 9, and it's one of those things we don't ask questions if they're producing the results that we're looking for.
And I think that's good because then they're modelling that and they'll hopefully achieve that. And then you can see the outcomes, you're able to track it and then really identify as to why they're not achieving those or haven't achieved those levels which you're looking for. So it really gives that intervention, that support, and how you then work with the players. And when it comes down to it, then working with players who might be in the system for, say, a period of time because, they might have started soccer from the age of 6 and, they might be 16, 17, 18, wherever they're at this current time or a group that you might be working with, at this time they might have fallen out of that love of soccer or have had enough of training or games, etc. And their attainment levels and their aspirations might be lower than you might expect or have been previously, or that curiosity level. So the three key considerations for me. And whilst those attainment levels, etc., might be lower, how do you get those levels to try and, rise back to where they were?
Yeah, so I think that's like the hardest thing to work through. I mean, a lot of it's like an internal, like they've kind of got to figure it out themselves a little bit. I mean, a big thing that I like to do and that I'm trying to work through if we run through this is like sit down with yourself. We really like a pros cons list within my program. So like we had a player that's working through a couple of things. So we were like, hey, create a pros cons list, the pros and cons of choosing option 1 and choosing option 2. And that's a lot of ways how we work through conflict or work through decision making when it comes to like their passion and their desire for their game. That's a very internal thing that they've got to figure out. So like for me, for instance, every time that I've maybe questioned like, why do I do this? Why do I stay in the game of soccer? I have a list that's just my reasons why. And I go back and I look at that and I'm like, it kind of rejuvenates why I play or why I coach the game, why I played the game. And that's something I want the girls this fall to work on is like, hey, why do I do this? Why do I come back every year? Why do I show up to practice every day? And maybe that's something they put into their locker. Last school year, they created 3 colors for the program that signify like reasons why they play like as a collective group. But I'd like this year to be more individual of like, all right, why do I do this? Why do I show up? Not why does my team show up? Why do I show up?
And I love that. And I think that shows, true reflection upon itself. And there's a transition between this year and next year and how that may look in terms of not only the team, but yourself, and then how that looks on a wider picture. And I think it's great because then you're able to really identify the reasons why you're doing something as well. Because sometimes we can get carried away and, we've got the players in front of us, we've got the team. That might be our big focus points. But again, living day to day and being us and who we are, we mustn't forget that we're given a life as well. So whilst we might progress the lives of 25 others, we forget about the lives that we have. So when it comes down to it, really understanding why we're doing it, or I want to enjoy it, or I want to get this more out of it. Sometimes we have to be a little bit more selfish as coaches and professionals because, as much as it might be all about the players and what we give them, sometimes it's all about what we need to take away as well as how we get there. So you might have those goals long term, but suddenly those goals might never happen or might be pushed back 25 years because we spent too long, spending, an amount of time doing one thing rather than trying to progress and looking at why we're doing it or how we get there or areas we might need to develop in and so on.
Yeah, I mean, over the last like 9 months, so I transitioned institutions that I worked at. And one thing I really looked at is like, all right, so I asked these kids to run fitness tests. I asked them to do all these like behavioral looking into themselves. Like, all right, I'm going to ask them to do it, but I'm going to ask myself to do it. So one thing like I've done personally is like I now run a lot more than I used to my year after playing collegiate soccer because it's like, all right, if I'm going to ask them, they need to be in super good shape. I should be in good shape. I should be able to keep up with them. So that's something like holding them to a standard, but also holding myself to a standard. And I've been working through the Atomic Habits book of like, how do I keep up these good habits? Because I've started running before, but I need to like actually keep with it if I want this to work. So I'm using Atomic Habits to like help me get through this. But I think that's a big thing of like, yes, there's like personal things that I need to get out of this at the end of the day, like making sure my reasons why are like satisfied and like my internal like desire and why I do this is satisfied. But like, if I can't say that I've done the same things, how can I ask them to do it? I mean, I did it during my collegiate days. I ran the pacer test. I did mile tests. Like, I've done all that and I've done the 2-a-days, but like, yeah, but am I still doing it? Do I still understand what they're going through? So I'm pushing myself to be better for them and be more relatable even 10 years down the road. Like, okay, yeah, I'm asking you guys to be physically fit, but I'm staying fit enough to keep up with you as well.
And I think, again, there's another key point within that because, some coaches might be like, well, I had to do it as a player so they can do it as well. Or they might have had to do a bleep test so they're doing it and I'm implementing this. But sometimes I'll stand there and I'll look at, right, would I really want to be doing this if I was a player? Would I enjoy it? And therefore, if the answer's a no, I'm like, right, I'm not going to do it because it's there. I'm not going to do it for the sake of it. I'm not going to implement it because it's something that I wouldn't do. And therefore, if I wouldn't do it, why would I expect my players to do it? And sometimes I might have to do it because I want them to reach levels that I never achieved, and maybe my aspirations or fitness levels might not have achieved those, and they need to get there to push. But sometimes, if I ask myself those questions, then I'm like, what's the real purpose behind it? Is there a real need? Is there the real benefits? What are the real outcomes? And if I can't answer those questions appropriately, then what's the real impact that it's having, and therefore does it need to be in the session? And the majority of the time, the answer is no. So therefore, you don't put it in and you readjust your session.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a big thing I'm learning now as a coach is like, yeah, I've got these aspirations and dreams, and some of them are outlandish, like should never happen. And I like have to like talk myself out of it of like, all right, that's too much. Like I ask myself the same question. Would I have wanted to do this when I played? No. So probably don't do it to them. And I mean, an adjustment for me is I'm coaching at the Division 2 level. I was a Division 3 athlete. Things are very different. And that's something I'm also working through. It's okay to ask more than my coach did when I played because there's money involved. There's a higher expectation, and that's okay. But also like giving myself the reality checks of like, okay, you want to push too far.
And I think asking questions is really key because, as you said, money is involved. And that's something which I say in uni because, some of the uni mates that I may have, they're like, right, the level is, the expectation could be that we have this knowledge or we should be knowing this or, we might not have explored it. So, I might be lacking, but I don't want to ask. And I'm like, you're paying literally for this course. So ask the 100 questions because when you've moved on in life in 10 years, all these questions that you would have asked, don't really matter in 10 years because no one might remember you asking or, oh, do you remember that time when that person asked 100 questions, blah, blah, blah. They're teaching, 100 different, 1,000 different students at that point. So they're not going to remember everything, but you might stand out being as the one who was asking, the one who's curious, the one who's learning. And by asking those questions, you're actually going to benefit yourself in 10 years. And it's something which I want to see more from my students, and therefore that's where that curiosity comes into. And the more curiosity you have, the more questions you want to ask, the more knowledge that you gain. And that's something which I've really learned to develop is ask as many questions as possible because sometimes I might just ask a simple question, why? Or what's the purpose of this? Or why would you do that? And sometimes people look at me and it's like the most basic thing to them. But for me, I'm like, I'm not an expert in your field. I'm not, I don't do it day to day. So for me, I don't understand why you're really doing it. So if you tell me why, then I'm like, right, I understand that. So, and that's the same for every athlete. And sometimes they might go, oh, coach, why are you doing this session today? Oh, I wanted to do this, this, and this. And sometimes it might not be clear. And it's the same in our sessions. And when I first started out, I thought having slalom poles, dome cones, little cones, having an assault course was the best session ever because every bit of equipment I could have, I'd use it. And if I had the use of a parachute as well, we'd do it. And now I look back and I'm like, did I need all that equipment? So some of my sessions, I might have, 10 cones only within. And some parents are looking at me going, is that it? And I'm like, just watch how this transitions through. We might just pick up 3 cones, we might just move that there, and we're going to spend a lot more time on the ball than jumping over hurdles, going throughout slalom poles without having to do everything. And, that's all part of learning, that's great. And there is a time when you can have those assault courses, especially with players, but sometimes, less is more. But by asking key questions and that curiosity, for me, I think I want to see that from every player that I work with.
Yeah, and I mean, a big thing is like being curious, and something that really challenged myself and our head coaches. We hosted a youth camp this summer. We went from pre-K to 6th grade. So we got real little, like 3-year-olds were showing up, and we definitely had to look at each other. We had session plans written out. Like I took the tiny humans because I like little kids, like those, that's my like bread and butter. Like give me little kids, like I can do this. And I'd even like forced myself to be like, oh, I don't need to make this complicated at all because they're still learning, like, how do I dribble a ball without using my toe? So, like, that's something that forced me to be curious of, like, oh, I'm not 3 years old anymore. Like, I'm 24 years old. Like, soccer's, it's, like, basic to them. It's just, like, kick ball into net, and that's the game. So it's exciting, like, when I look at like our team and I look at like the 3-year-olds I worked with, it's like, yes, I can assume people would know things and they would know how to do it, but they not always going to. And that's something we look for within our program is like, all right, you don't understand why we're doing it, or you want to know more about a certain skill, like come ask questions. Obviously, there's an appropriate moment in time for questions and to question why we do certain things, but I want that our coaching staff has decided like we want to provide space for them. Maybe not in the middle of a practice or during a session or during in the middle of a game, but come to the office after practice or stay later after a session and let's talk it out so you understand why we're doing it, or let's go deeper into it so you can understand how in different situations those skills will apply.
And whilst you've mentioned that disc assessment and that inheritance of it and how you're going to utilize it, whilst players may lack that game intelligence or that game understanding because you want to see them come out and approach you or ask you why or spend that time just asking those questions maybe beyond practice. Do you have another assessment while players might come in on a trial period or players might come in at pre-season to start addressing, all right, we've assessed their game intelligence is not at this level, we've assessed technical levels, we've assessed fitness. Is that something which you build in or is that something you just naturally find over time as you work with players?
So that's something we look for in the recruiting process. Like, how much do you actually know the game, or are you just like a rhythmic kind of player that just figures it out as they go? And we're always kind of looking for the players that have the better understanding of the game, but sometimes people show up and we're like, oh, you like just go out and you just figure it out. And so one thing that we're doing as program is breaking down our game model and why we do, like, why is our formation a certain way? Like, what do we look for in those formations? And we're hoping that really helps with if somebody's behind in the game model or the soccer IQ aspect, it really helps catch them up. And it may seem redundant to some of our players that have the soccer IQ, but we want to make sure it's a level playing field for our entire team. Like, you all know what's expected. You all know what everything's going to look like. And then once we've done that, we're going to try to push them or hope that they just come and ask more questions if they need it.
And I think that's great because you're able to break down that game model and really understand where players might be lacking and how further to support them. Because sometimes, again, we might have this assumption whereby players might come in or they're coming through a program or they might be coming from other clubs or other programs. And we might have this expectation where we'd like them to be at. But in reality, they're not at those levels. So how do we, identify, understand, and really help them improve to get to those areas or increase those levels, etc. And I think, that sometimes coaches might not have that consideration or have those high expectations. So I think it's great in terms of how you do that and how you work with them and really support them over that time then, because again, that assumption level can really impact yourself whilst you're delivering a session. So you might be asked to put on a session by the head coach and suddenly you've got all these learning outcomes planned and then suddenly the players aren't getting it or they haven't equipped the objectives, etc. Then the head coach is looking at you going, right, you might have failed on that session. Whereas what you've actually failed on is just understanding your players. So that session could have just been adapted in certain ways or one or two things could have just dropped off. But that's the whole enjoyment of coaching, and that's the enjoyment of where we're at, and again comes full circle to those personalities.
Yeah, and a big thing that the head coach I'm working with right now is really teaching me is that it's okay that if you write a session plan with 4 drills in it, you only get through 2 of them, because clearly if the players aren't meeting your objectives, they're not getting it, they need to spend more time on it. It's okay to just scrap practice and be like, okay, I thought we had the understanding of this drill and what the key objectives are, but we need to slow down. And that's a big thing that was hard for me to understand is like, oh, it's okay to just like not get through everything you plan, which I work with a youth team and I'm really putting that to practice now of like, okay, here's where I want them to be. Here's the expectations, the objectives. Okay, we're not getting it. Stop. Like, let's just keep doing this. And yeah, sometimes it stinks. You do the same drill for 45 minutes, but at the end of practice, I'm like, we do like a knowledge check and it's like, okay, when XYZ, whatever question I want to ask for that knowledge check, when they can leave practice and answer that the way that the question needs to be answered, I know practice ended up being what it should have been because they can answer the key objectives.
And I think that's great to have that knowledge check and how you work with them to really understand them, as well as being able to scrap part of your session, because that's something which I always thought I had to do. Right, I've got all these objectives, I want to achieve this, and I planned this in my session, so therefore I have to achieve every part of it, and it must be delivered. But as I've learned over time, like, right, if we don't move on to that, or we don't get it, or I need to extend time, or I might take time off this, that's completely fine. Or doing the exact same session next week and just having that repetition, that opportunity to learn is completely fine. I always used to think, right, I've got 10 sessions, and all 10 sessions might be or have to be different. Whereas I might go, you know what, I might block 3 as the same, I might do 3 then which are very different, and then I might spend the last 4 a combination of the first 6, but I might just deliver the components in different ways. But there is nothing wrong in repeating the session 3 times over, and it's not saying that you're not good enough as a coach because the players have had to do it 3 times. It's just saying, right, there's repetition, there's great opportunity. So by the end of, say, session 3 or contact 3, these players should be at a higher level than they were at number 1. So if you deliver this session again, say in a month's time, then realistically this session should be something which they're equipped to do very quickly and have the outcomes what they can achieve very quickly because of the result of delivering 3 in a row in that repetition.
Yeah, and I mean, a big thing, I play this silly possession game with my little kids, my U12 girls, and it's lopsided possession, so the attackers have more than players than defenders. But we play this game like once a week at practice, and like the beginning when we started doing it, they're like, we've played this game so much, like why are we playing it so much? But first week we played it, it was like get 5 passes as offense, get a point. Your defense, get the ball back to coach, and that's a point. Defense won like 12-0. And I'm like, this is not how this drill is supposed to go. Offense, you have an advantage for a reason. And we kept doing it. And now offense just kills defense. And now they like have fun playing it. They're hitting all the points. And I'm like, this is why we keep playing it, because you're getting better. You're doing what you're supposed to. And I mean, at U12, that's a very pivotal point in American soccer or any soccer, because that's the year before they shift to a full 11v11 field, which is exciting and nerve-wracking. But having passing and possessions key when you get to the big field. Can you keep the ball? And I just want them to be ready to do that. So it's something I've gotten more comfortable with, of like, all right, we're just going to keep doing this once a week, twice a week, in order to make sure not only are you set for our season and keep winning games, but can you move these skills on in a year when you are a U13 player on an 11v11 field and you have way more space than you've ever had in your life? So it's an exciting like skill learning for me and for them. And that's something I'm excited to apply with the college team, of like, all right, we're going to keep doing the same things until so first of all, you get comfortable with the drills, because we're introducing a lot of drills they've never played before. But we're also pushing them to like, these are like the baby steps of like much bigger soccer IQ things that we want them to learn. And we're excited over time for them to see, oh, I see why we did this, because now it makes us way better at what you really wanted us to achieve.
And I think that transition and moving to 11v11 is very important, because, there's a lot more key considerations, that pitch geography, the size, the stature, the fitness, the components, how you break lines, how you recover possession, how you keep possession, actually moving a player away from the space that you need by just moving the ball around, rather than you having to make that space by running away lots of the time, or understanding when and where, how to do things. So there is a lot of transition that comes into play, and that's where that real, sort of step up or opportunity to look at the tactical side might come into play. And that's a real, evolving and learning process as part of a coach as well, and where that curiosity comes from. So, some coaches might be, right, I want to stay an assistant coach and I love working with the players. I want to look at their mental health. I want to work at mentoring. I want to do the technical side with them. I want to see them move through. Whilst I like the work under a head coach, might have strategy, tactics, and that framework, that game model, etc. But, it's great as an overall and position that you're in as an assistant to learn all these combinations. And again, it comes down to that curiosity and saying no, and where those boundaries are, and not spinning too many plates, because there might be a fitness component and you're like, nah, fitness, I need to know a bit, but I'm not interested in it. I don't want to be an expert, and hence why we might have fitness coaches and physios, etc. But where you might then excel at the tactical side doesn't mean that your physio has to excel at the tactical side. So it's just understanding what might work for you and not balancing too many plates. And it's great in terms of that journey you're on and the players that you work with. And so you've mentioned ultimate goals, where you'd like to be, and those director positions. But is there like an ultimate goal where you'd like to be like, right, I want to be a manager of this team, or I want to work at national level, or I want to be a head coach? What sort of long-term ultimate goal are you aiming for?
I mean, my ultimate goal right now is to become a head coach. I'm very familiar with like the state of Minnesota, so maybe staying there because that's what I know well. I would have an advantage in recruiting because I know the clubs, all of that. But in reality, it's just to be a head coach. College coaching is you have to take opportunities when they come. So it's really just when the opportunity comes, taking it.
And that's why it is, identifying it, and when it comes up, take it, and you never see what might happen. And again, it's living day to day and that enjoyment and taking that joy out of it. And say you don't achieve that ultimate goal of being a head coach, is that something which you're sort of scared of, or is that something internally I'm always going to achieve this, or I am going to achieve it?
I mean, with my like past of being a goalkeeper and stuff like that, like it's all or nothing. Like I know I can achieve that. I mean, there were a lot of barriers when I was playing youth soccer and into the collegiate game. Like I'm only 5 feet tall and I was a collegiate goalkeeper. People did not expect me to be able to achieve those goals. And now I look back at them and I'm like, hee hee, I did it. So like that's the same way I am with being a head coach. Like anyone can tell me maybe you won't do it or maybe it's not possible, but my eyes are always set on the prize of like whatever my goal is and being ahead. Like I won't let it not happen.
I love that, and I think that's absolutely, true, where that self-belief comes from, and that upbringing and that experience which you've had, and where you're going and where those goals come from. And whilst you mentioned, say, winning championships and having that and being able to deliver winning teams and performance and success and so on, say you become a head coach, and you might spend 10 years as a head coach, and you might have, say, various jobs within that time as a head coach, but a 10-year span, and you haven't won a single championship, but overall you've done well. You've built up, say, a nice record overall. Your teams have always battled well. You've built up a strong philosophy, and people are like, right, Coach Morgan builds good teams. She's a good people manager. We would look at her for stability. We'd look at her to really be great on our program or team, etc. But for you, whilst you haven't, delivered those championships or achieved what you might have set out to do, or that excitement of winning, would that be something that you would be disappointed on yourself to do by not winning those championships, or would you be happy to say, yeah, I've got that good stability, and I like how other clubs and jobs and organisations look at me?
I mean, at the end of the day, like, yes, like championships, trophies, those are all important and exciting. Like, sometimes those determine whether you keep a job or not. But at the end of the day, like, why I love the game of soccer isn't because of winning. It's not because of results. It's because of the relationships I've made, because of the memories I've had. Like, I want to make sure no matter who's in my programs, who I work with, if they look back and they're like, I loved playing under Coach Morgan or I love being a part of that program, like then I've done my job. Then I'll have more success than a trophy will ever give me. If the players can leave my program and be happy and ready, and maybe they achieve coaching and they get championships or they get the promotion and all those things, like then I know I did my job. It'll mean way more than any trophy will ever mean to me.
And I love that, and I think that's great, way to explain things, and again, give that real purpose as to why you're doing things. And say you had those 10 years, and you've had, the maybe no championships, but you're doing a very good job, and you're achieving all those things which you say. And say at the end of those 10 years, you've got a job opportunity to say join a bigger club, but it's going to be an assistant coach. But it might be for a club that are delivering a lot of success and winning those championships. But you have an opportunity now to maybe experience that as a coach, but to step away from head coaching. Is that something that you could see yourself doing, or would it always be head coach and this is my ultimate goal and this is where I want to stay regardless?
It's tough to like answer. Like I have no idea. I mean, it would depend on where I was in life. Like I'm a very loyal person. Like when I join a program, when I join a university, I plan on being loyal to them until I need to like step away for whatever reason. So it would be tough to like leave to take a demotion in my head because I would be loyal to the place I am. And I mean, I think with my dreams of being a head coach, potentially an AD one day or having a role, I think once I get the taste of being a head coach, I'm not going to want to step down.
I love that, and it just shows again where that innate belief is and what you want to do and where you're going to go and achieve it. You're not going to want to give that up, just because success might be around the corner. But it's just that, reflection of going, right, I've done this, but I might like to just experience this. But it is hard then to sort of step down from where where you want to be at to, something which is going to take away lesser. And whilst you're an assistant coach now, you're very young, you're learning, you've got a lot of opportunity in front of you. And you've got this innate belief that you're going to be a head coach, and it's obviously certainly will, because you speak like a head coach and someone who's got 15 years experience behind you, by the way. Is it hard to sort of then channel your emotions or that energy to become a head coach right now, because you're like, right, I've got an assistant job, I might spend 2 or 3 years having to develop my philosophy and experience? Or is it, right, I want to get there and this is the engine forward?
I mean, there's always like this little voice in the back of my head that's like, are you ready? Could you do it if you got the opportunity? And I thought the same thing when I was offered my first full-time assistant job. Like, are you ready to be a college coach? Can you do it? Like, it's one of those things you just have to jump in blind and hope it works out. I work super hard, and the one thing, like my whole life, it's like I'll always be the hardest worker in the room. And no matter if I'm not ready, as long as I work hard, I know I'll be able to do it, and I can ask for help. And if I make mistakes, all right, I make a mistake, I can learn from it and keep going. That I think if the opportunity came, I would take it and I would run and hope it went well. But I don't know, nothing scares me at the end of the day, because you have to take the opportunities to see if you can be successful at it.
Absolutely. I love that you say jumping in and taking things and seeing what happens, because, we might be quite pragmatic in terms of, right, I want to approach this and my time might be here, and we might have that strategy, and again, we might overanalyze. Sometimes where that opportunity might come up, we might actually miss the opportunity because that opportunity might not come up again. So then you might miss that chance of being a head coach, and therefore you're stuck in being an assistant coach. And it might be a very stable position. It might bring that income and, that part of life which we got to consider, which is called living. But sometimes missing that opportunity because we're too pragmatic is a real, situation where we don't want to be in, for example.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely times I look back, even in my playing career and all of that, where I'm like, I should have done this, but I did it. And I don't like that feeling now. I'm learning as I'm still young. Like, if it scares you, you should probably go do it. And that was something as like a young 18, 19-year-old, I did not understand. I was like, ooh, that's a scary decision. No. But like now that I'm learning and I'm growing, like, yeah, fear is not something to be scared of. It's something that should motivate you. Like, I've got personal dreams of like running a marathon and things like that. Running a marathon terrifies me. 26 miles, that's way too much. Like, But I'm using that to be like, all right, you don't think you can do it, but you can. Just keep pushing. And so that's like how I look at with coaching. Like, it scares me, and there's the opportunity I might miss what I should go for, but I can't look at it that way. I just have to take every opportunity I can and know when it's my time to take that step.
Absolutely. And that's something which I sort of reflect upon. I know innate, I'm always wanting to be in a leadership position. I know that's within me. That's where I thrive off. I enjoy it. And it's not just a case of getting to a management position because it brings the good pay and I can manage people. I know on a leadership, and whether that's in any role, whether it's classed as leader or management, I'm always want to go into lead. I always want to, develop things, and I can feel it in myself sometimes in meetings. I'm like, I want to do this, I want to push more. But sometimes that energy levels where I'm like, I want to push, I want to get there. I'm like, right, how do I channel that to make sure that I'm doing the best I can now, but to make sure I'm not missing that opportunity or not trying to push myself? Because sometimes I reflect back, I'm like, right, at 26, I should have actually achieved this, I should have actually done that. And if I had only taken that strategy a few years ago, then I might actually be there at this point. And so therefore I can go back and change time, but I can only learn from it. So how do I implement that strategy so I'm not saying the same things at the age of 30? But then it's making sure that I'm doing what I can right now in terms of doing the best job I can and not over exceeding myself where I'm like, right, I've outgrown this, or I should be pushing for that. But to be doing the best I can, and then, trying to push for the higher positions which I know I'm very capable at and know where I want to be. Sometimes it's hard to get that balance right because of that energy and that innate ability to go out and go, right, I want to be a head coach, I want to find myself. And that's the same, and a perfect example is Jose Mourinho. He always was a good assistant manager, but he always knew he wanted to be a manager. So when the opportunity came, boom, he jumped for it. And that's just about jumping at the right time. And if you know it's within you, then go and do it. What's the worst that can happen? You learn from it. You have a go again in a few years. You might have to step back to be an assistant coach. But if you know it's within you, then go and do it, and certainly take that jump and take it a day at a time as well.
Yeah, and it's something I'm excited for, and like I hope it happens sooner than later. But I know I need to put my time in as an assistant and learn the ropes and learn from the head coaches I work for. Like, and that's a big thing in like how I choose the jobs that I go for. I choose people that are like, I want to equip you with the skills to become a head coach. So the 2 assistant jobs that I've had, it's like, all right, here are my aspirations. Can you help me get there? And them both saying yes is super important to me, and I'm super grateful for that, especially with the head coach I'm working with now. Like, he is very much so like, he's like, I know you're not going to be here forever, and that's not the game plan. So how do I equip you with everything you need to be a head coach one day, or hopefully leave here to go be a head coach one day? And that's something that's super exciting for me, and I appreciate so much from who I work for, is like, he wants me to be more than just this position.
And I think that's great, and you've got a fantastic opportunity at both the organisation as well as the head coach that you're working with, because again, you're a product of your environment, and unless you're in that right environment to grow and develop in those aspirations, and the same is for our players, so it's about those right personalities now that fits. And again, that flip side of the coin of looking at the coach ourselves and being selfish and taking what's out there, we have to look at the right institutions, the right organisations, which is going to allow them to, maybe make that investment in us, to equip us with the time to go on and learn, and to help us progress towards our aspirations. And I have a very good job now. I enjoy where I'm at, but there was a conversation last week whereby I was put forward for a course. I had the agreement that I could go on it, and there was a good selection level internally, but down the funding, because of the sort of funding that I'm receiving for uni, it impacted on doing that course. So therefore the school and where I currently teach weren't willing to invest in the course, and therefore I'm like, right, so you're not willing to actually invest in that, so therefore you're not willing to meet my aspirations. And therefore I'm like, right, is this really where I'm going to thrive and learn, or is it where I'm going to be stuck for, say, maybe the next 2-3 years, and I'm going to really have this experience, but I'm going to hit a ceiling, which I currently feel that I'm at right now. And that's not arrogance behind it, that's just feeling, right, I've filled in my box, the room is full, I want to get out and I want to be in a bigger room to get to the next ceiling. And meeting those aspirations, because again, you might get to 30 and you're like, oh, I should have actually achieved that. So we have to look at ourselves as well within this coaching journey. And it is hard because some people are like, it's a team, it's a club, it's the players, it's the institution. Well, what about us as coaches and where we actually fall down into it?
Yeah, and I mean, when I look at like myself, and it's like, the hardest lesson I've ever learned in my life is like, it's okay to be selfish, to do things that better for your life, for you, and to get you closer to what you want. Especially like when you transition jobs in coaching, it's like, I don't want to upset my former employer, like that I need to go on and do something what I feel like is better for me, because they may not see it that way, but as long as I see it that way, that's what's important. And that's like the toughest lesson I'm still learning, but getting better at. But at the end of the day, like, selfishness only gets you where you want to be. And especially in sports, like, I want my players to always know this too. Like, the only person that's going to look out for you at the end of the day is yourself. So do what's best for you.
Absolutely. I think that's something which I've had to learn very, well, I say slowly, because that is something that, I've been hit, I've been punched, and that's metaphorically mine. Because of the lessons that I've learned and the positions that I've taken, and that's something which I've started to come across. And some people don't like that, but if you're a winner and you're a leader and you want to get to those levels, you've got aspirations, you've got goals, then you have to be selfish to get there. You have to push yourself. You have to be willing to maybe cut the rope at times, and sometimes it is difficult. And sometimes that's where my real truth life reflections come from. It's nice to be liked. It's nice to people say you've done a good job. It's nice to have people looking at you. But at the end of the day, in say 10 years, if what you've got doesn't meet what your maybe expectations are, or doesn't fulfill your happiness, then you might be in an all right position realistically, because all right isn't where you'd like to be, so therefore you've deemed yourself at that level. But you have to be selfish to get to where you want to be, and sometimes, as much as it can be harsh to maybe cut that rope, it has to be done.
Yeah, and it's one of those tough things. Like, it's never fun, it's never enjoyable, and like, I hope I'm not in a place in 15, 20 years where I'm like, I wish I would have done this, or I'm not where I would like to be. But it is a reality that I may have to face. And I think at that, as the years go by, like, I want to make sure I'm on the right path. And something as an adult, like goal setting, super important for me. Like, I have a little note in my phone that's like my 2023 goals, and I check in a little bit, and it's like, have I been doing it? Am I keeping up with them? Was that realistic of me? Because sometimes goals aren't realistic. Like, I can't say that everything I write down is perfect for me, but I can hope for it. I mean, so if I'm not where I want at 20 or at 30 years old, maybe I've got to reevaluate my goals. Maybe those were unrealistic, but right now that the sky's the limit for my goals, so I'm going to keep pushing for them.
And whilst you're there, it's making sure that you don't lose those energy levels or don't lose that aspiration, because, sometimes over the years, and maybe my energy levels, because of positions that I've been in, have chipped away those aspirations. And, well, not chipped, my aspirations are still there, but the energy towards those aspirations. And I feel that I don't have that eye of the tiger, as Rocky says, or Apollo Creed to Rocky. Sometimes I'm like, right, I could definitely see that I had it at 22, but sometimes I'm like, right, I'd lose that one day, I've got it back the next day. And that's just because of where life plays out, and maybe my mental thinking, and hence where my forsake and reflection and all that comes from, and it's down to me to manage. But I know when I had, and what I can hear and see in you, it's like, boom, I'm going to achieve it, I'm going to push for it, I'm going to do this. And I had that, and I was there, and I'm still doing it, but I'm not at the pace I was doing it a couple of years ago. So whilst you're there, is make sure that you continue to do it, Morgan, and whilst you've got it, don't let it go away, because I think that you are going to go far. And whilst you've got those aspirations and those goals, maintain that eye of the tiger.
Yeah, I mean, I think while I'm young and I've got the time, I don't have as many commitments like outside of my job. Like, it's 100%, 100 miles per hour. Like, I'm always going to be going. And I know as my like go through life, like, it's going to slow down because there's going to be more to it. Like, one day if I have a family and my family, like, I'm going to have to like balance work and life a lot more. Like, right now, I can have work be up here and life be down here. Like, it's not always going to be like that. So, my goal is, can I always be at my version of 100% while balancing wherever life takes me?
And again, that's where that selfishness comes down to, because I'm like 26, and I look at my year group, which I went to school with, and there's only very few of us left within a certain group where we don't have kids, we're not engaged, we don't have houses, and all these other wider commitments right now, because, we're in between where we'd like to be, finishing uni, or looking at maybe going abroad, or where we might move for a job, but we're maybe not moving where the others have moved. And whilst it comes down to it, I'm like, right, I don't have kids at least for another 6 years, so between, say, 30 and 32, that's the ideal age I'd like to have it. So by then I'll hopefully be a qualified teacher. Hopefully then I'll have certain badges behind me. Hopefully I'll have that stability, and I would have chased my dreams as well. And then therefore, if I have to be selfish, then at another point whereby, I might have a 4-year-old, but I might want to go experience coaching abroad, and that's something which I might do for a year. Then that's something which I might have to take and swallow that pill. But it's also making sure whereby I don't delay having kids too long and putting work first, whereby, suddenly I'm 38 having my first child, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just I want to make sure I have the energy levels to give back to them, and make sure I enjoy being, I run around with them on a football pitch while I can and all that, or have that energy levels to go, right, I'm going to actually coach your team, because I might have done it for years, but I actually want to coach your team. But it's just that balance, but making sure, but some people don't see it as that, and the other part of that group, which I'm not in because I haven't had kids, etc., might look at that and go, why are you being selfish for? Why don't you get to that point? And sometimes it's like, yeah, I don't want that. Like, some people, someone that I talked to who was quite close to me was like, by the time I was your age, my child's 4 years old. I was like, I've got no indication of like wanting a kid now. I've got no like indication of wanting like to settle down, and I'm like, that's just not me, because I don't see that at a point where I want to be in life right now, because my career isn't where I want it to be, and I've got these goals, and I'm gonna have to be very selfish in attaining those.
Yeah, and a big thing, like, I'm in a weird time of my life too. Like, friends are getting married, classmates. Like, some are even pregnant and having kids, and I'm like, whoa, like my life's not there, and that's okay. Like, and I talk to them, and they're like, we both are like, that's just, we have our unique paths of life, and theirs, it was getting married and having kids early. Mine, it's not going to be on the same timeline as them. And when I look to like adding people into my life and like what my future looks like, they're going to have to understand that our timeline's not going to look like somebody else's. So it's definitely a weird world as a coach, is like, yeah, like this traditional life of like 9 to 5, and every night you like come home, make dinner together, and do all of that stuff, coach your kids' soccer team and all of that, may not be what my life looks like when that happens. So it's a very weird world to live in, especially as a young coach, when family pressures and all of that. And they're like, are you sure? Like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen and how that's going to look. But at the end of the day, I know my timeline just looks different, and it'll happen when it happens. But I think when it does happen and people understand like what I do for a career and what I have to give up in order to have my career, it'll make it that much better.
Absolutely. And I love what you say, that very basic point of it's okay. And that it's okay not to be there. It's okay that I don't want to do this. It's okay that I'm not, at those levels which you might be at, because, we're not at those levels. We might not have those times, and therefore that timeline isn't as what others might expect it to be. And therefore we have that uniqueness and that reality to be that selfish, to go where we're going and, really define who we are, where we're going, what we want to do. And, I see a lot of those people like, right, even though you got kids, are you going to go and achieve your goals? Are you going to do this, X, Y, and Z? And they're like, no. And I'm like, that, as much as you might put your kids forward, I'm like, that's very sad as well, because you only get to live once, and you only got, certain amount of dreams and goals that you may have, and therefore you're never ever going to attain them. And you might find happiness in other ways by having a family and all this and that. I'm like, I want to find that happiness and achieve my goals, and I'm like, I'm not happy unless I got both. And I know that's within me internally, because I'm like, yeah, I don't want to have that all right level, because I'm not going to be all right with it. It might be all right, but I am not going to cope. And I'm always going to say to myself, I wish I'd done this. I wish I pushed myself. And that's something which I'm definitely taking on with me in my daily journey right now, even at 26. And, trying to take each day as it comes, but also making sure I'm looking at the future and going, yeah, make sure I do what I do now, because I don't want to be in that position where I look back and go, I wish I'd done more. And I think that's great to connect with someone like you at a similar age and have that similar mentality to have these true discussions, because some people don't really understand the way that we think, and having that mindset and the way that we're going, people don't really understand it, and it's tough for them.
Yeah, and I mean, exactly what you said. It's like, yeah, I want to have the family and all of that, but like achieving my goals and having that's what I want. And it's like, I almost won't accept it unless I get it that way. Like, if I can't achieve my goals and do the family thing, like, I don't want it. And that's what I'm looking for in life, is like soccer and my career. Like, it's way more than a career to me. I've made it my lifestyle, and I want to add people into it that understand that, which is exciting. And having friends and family that get it, and they're not rushing me, and they're not adding those pressures of like family asking all the questions. That's exciting, and that's what I'm looking for in life. But I know everything will happen when it will, and it's exciting. Like, we have a pretty young, just overall athletic staff, so a lot of people that I work around get it and they understand it, and I have more people that I can relate to than I don't relate to, which is exciting.
And I think that's good. And that, again, it comes down to that product of an environment and relatability as well. So it's that full circle, because, again, that relatability come up right at the start of the conversation, and boom, we're at it towards the end of it. And that's something where I work now. I've gone from a very youthful staff to, I say, a more experienced and more matured staff by the organisations I've moved to. And there's nothing wrong with being in that matured staff, but I can't relate to a lot of the people that I work with, because there is that massive timeline and age gap between us, and they're at different points in their lives in different stages. I'm like, yeah, but and then I try to have those conversations, and it doesn't just play out because of the ones that I work with. I'd have those very similar conversations, so therefore you're naturally uplifting your aspirations every day because you're having these conversations, and therefore I'm not having these conversations now, so it's impacting me motivationally, because I'm like, oh, I'm not having that conversation, that didn't happen, and that's hard to deal with. And sometimes it's just again, that product environment where you're at, making sure the organisation meets your aspirations. And when it comes down to people, that relatability, those relationships, that communication, and so much that comes into it, and everything that you've emphasised really does come into it. And whilst you said you've learned a lot of lessons so far, you're continuing to learn, you're moving forward, and you're taking every day one step at a time, as well as having that outlook towards the future. What does reflection mean to Coach Morgan?
I think reflection is, first of all, like accepting that you can't change what has happened. Like, it's happened and it's going to stay that way. But it's twofolded. Yes, you're accepting it, but how can you, if you're not okay with what had happened, how can you make the future better? And those are just making sure I have action plans to do certain things. But I try to stay very focused on the present and what's happening, because I want, a big skill of mine is, can I say no enough where when I do say yes, it's because I can be present and enjoy it and do it to my best when I do say yes. So that's a big thing for me. It's like accepting what had happened, having the action plan to be ready for what my future, but being present where I'm not worried about either other, that I can just focus on what's happening.
I love that, and I think that is such a great reflection quote, and if not the best one that I've had so far out of the ones that I've asked. And I'm not just saying that because you're there. It's generally so great, and I've made sure I've noted down the time for that one because I really want to clip that and take that back. But it's been a great episode because we've been able to talk about what you might do with the players, how you manage that, how you work as an assistant, but also where you're going and back down to you as a coach as well. And it's great that I have a lot of conversations with the guests that I have on, and they might talk about their methodology or their game model or how they work with players. But it's been that nice balance between actually looking at who are coaches, where they're at and where they're going. Because for those sort of listening, in the back of my mind, there might be a lot of coaches or other professionals or even individuals who might listen and might not even know where they're at in life, or might be finding themselves or asking themselves that why question. And sometimes this gives a lot of affirmation around that. And certainly listening to someone who's at an age and they might find themselves at a similar age and looking at where they're going, how they're going, or what is Coach Morgan doing, and taking that away might actually just give them some reflection points or just little ways that they might think about where they're going, and certainly that route and those aspirations. So it's been a nice sort of episode to wrap around between that balance between who you are really as a coach, as well as defining us as coaches on the Reflective Coach podcast. So there's a lot of questions which I've sort of just glanced at, and I haven't even touched upon them with you because you've taken the conversation away, and it's been great to have this conversation with you. You've got a long way to go in your journey, as do I. And I hope, we both can look at each other in 5 years and see what much more we've done. But I hope to speak a lot more before we get to the 5 years, mind. But it is nice to sort of talk to someone who's at a starting point still, and allowing to then build on the reflective process. But as I said to you earlier, it's been like speaking to someone who's got 15 years experience behind them, and you can already see and hear it within you. And unless I've researched into the fact that you are an assistant coach, I would have said head coach all day long.
Yeah, and I mean, it's definitely just like, I fake it till you make it. Like, I just am confident in my decisions and what I talk about, and it's exciting. I really appreciated talking way more just than the game itself, because coaching and soccer are way more than just kicking a ball around. So I've really appreciated this opportunity, and I'm sure we'll stay in contact and talk more. But yeah, I really appreciate having this opportunity.
I really appreciate it as well, and I'm glad that we could, rearrange it a few times, but we got there in the end. But I really do appreciate it, and I've loved speaking to you, and it'd be amazing to have you on again. And especially as there's so much to cover, and we've barely even scratched the surface. But before you go, I'm going to throw some quick fire questions at you.
Sounds good.
Perfect. If you had to have someone describe you in 3 words, what 3 words would they be?
Loud, passionate, and competitive.
Love them. I completely agree. If you could move to any country to coach, where would it be?
Probably Australia.
Love that. Love that. I've got a friend going out there next month. Very sad times. If you could spend a day with any coach or manager, who would it be?
Probably Jill Ellis.
Yeah, great choice, great choice. And when I said sad times there, just reflecting on that, that's not because they're going to Australia. That's just because I'm going to miss them and I know how I'm feeling towards that. Who was or is your role model?
My dad.
Love that. I love a personal one. That's a great one. If you had the chance to be a full-time professional player or a full-time professional coach, which one would you choose?
Probably a full-time professional player.
Yeah.
I miss playing the game.
Not still playing alongside in, say, a five-a-side team, no?
Not really. It's not really something we have a ton of up here. I mean, I kick the ball around every once in a while, but I miss like the competitive, like playing 11 aside.
I understand. I get that. What would be one job you could take if you had any chance of any job out there?
Uh, I mean, the U.S. national team, like that's like glory of like everything. Because watching them grow playing as I grow up, like that would be the dream.
Love that. If you weren't coaching soccer, what other sport would you be coaching?
Ultimate frisbee.
Oh, that's a first on there. Why?
It's the only other sport I really played besides doing karate growing up. So I have a love for it because it's such a unique sport and it challenges you in so many different ways. So probably that.
I love that. That's definitely a first. If you could manage any player, who would it be?
Alex Morgan.
Yep, love that. Very experienced top player. Shame it didn't work out for her in England, but you know, we can win it all.
Yeah,
Who is your all-time favorite player? Might be the same.
yeah, it's Alex Morgan. Just an all-time all-star. Or Brianna Scurry. Definitely having a goalkeeper role model when I was growing up was a big thing for me.
Yep, definitely. What is your biggest pet peeve?
Tardiness.
I
Don't be late.
Yeah, I sit there like anxiously and I'm rocking if I'm just all. What is your favorite thing to do in your downtime?
Uh, Probably reading. I'm a big reader. Outside and reading.
Love that again, brilliant. What are your non-negotiables?
Communication, being open, communicating, being on time. Yeah, those are the two things for me. If you communicate and you're on time, we're not going to have problems.
Superb. And any player who's listening, just take that away, or any possible recruit. I'm definitely going to put that out there. And what is one thing you enjoy most about coaching?
I would say the little things of like the creating the bonds, the funny moments, the pictures that like last years and years.
I love that, and I think that wraps up a fantastic episode. And I really appreciate your time, especially on a Sunday, and especially when you've got nothing on. And good luck on your camp tomorrow. I know you're going to be fantastic at it, and definitely catch up with you soon. But again, thank you for coming on and giving up the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Been an absolute pleasure.
Bye.
See you later.